The snow was falling harder than it had all winter, blanketing the streets of New York in thick, silent white. Midnight had long passed, and the city, usually never asleep, seemed to have finally dozed off under the weight of the storm. Streetlights cast a dim orange glow through the haze, and the wind howled between empty buildings. A sleek, black armored sedan moved slowly through the deserted street, its tires crunching softly against the snow. Inside, Kwon Jae-wha sat with one hand resting on the leather steering wheel, the other tapping impatiently on the console. The world outside was a blur of white, and he had no reason to be driving at this hour, except that the silence of the storm was better than the silence of his empty penthouse. He was a man who commanded the city's shadows, a powerful Korean mafia boss whose name was spoken in whispers, yet tonight, he was just a man chasing away the ghosts of insomnia. As he turned onto Lexington Avenue, he spotted someone at the bus stop. He squinted, slowing the car until it came to a sharp halt. There, huddled on the cold metal bench, was a young woman in a green nurse's uniform. Her dark hair was damp with snow, her shoulders trembling under a too-thin coat. She was about 25, an African nurse whose strength seemed to be failing against the brutal cold. She sat stiffly, hands stuffed into her pockets, eyes unfocused. Her phone lay uselessly in her lap, screen black, battery dead. Jae-wha's brow furrowed. Without thinking, he threw the car into park and stepped out. The cold hit him instantly, biting through his expensive suit, but he barely noticed. He approached her with quiet steps, the snow muffling the sound of his Italian leather shoes. She did not look up until he spoke. "You're coming with me," her head snapped toward him, her dark eyes wide with alarm. "Excuse me? I don't even know you." He looked directly at her, his voice calm but firm, a tone that left no room for argument. "I'm not leaving you here to freeze. That's not happening." She stood up quickly, instinctively putting a few feet between them. "I'm fine," she said, even though her voice shook and her teeth chattered. "I'm waiting for the next bus." "There is no next bus," he replied, glancing down the empty street. "Not tonight. Everything shut down. No taxis, no trains, and you're wearing scrubs in a snowstorm. I can figure it out," she insisted, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. He did not move closer, but there was an intensity in his gaze that didn't let her look away. It wasn't pity, not attraction, but something else, like unspoken recognition of a fighter. He wore a black Mafia suit and a crisp white-collared shirt, looking like someone who had never stood at a freezing bus stop in his life. Against her better judgment, her body gave her the answer first. Her legs moved before her voice did. "Fine," she murmured, and he opened the passenger door. She slipped inside, unsure if this was a mistake, unsure of anything except the warmth that instantly wrapped around her. The door shut with a soft, heavy thud, muffling the wind. She watched as he walked around the car and got in beside her, then glanced once at her before pulling away from the curb. Neither of them spoke as the car moved down the snowy street. Two strangers in a silent vehicle, bound by nothing but an unlikely moment and the mercy of a Korean mafia boss who never stopped for anyone until tonight. The hum of the heater filled the silence between them as the sedan glided through the snow-dusted streets. The windows slowly cleared from fog, revealing the glittering city blanketed in white. Inside the car, the warmth was almost shocking after the bitter cold outside. Imani sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands still wrapped tightly around her thin coat. She glanced sideways at the man driving. He had not said another word since she got in. He seemed entirely focused on the road, his profile sharp and imposing in the glow of the dashboard lights. Everything about him was meticulous and radiated power. His posture, his expensive watch, even the way he held the steering wheel with an unnerving stillness. "Thank you," she said quietly, more out of habit than expectation. He did not look at her. "You do not have to thank me." "You were freezing," she hesitated. Still, most people wouldn't have stopped. A faint, almost imperceptible smile pulled at the corner of his lips. "I am not most people." The response could have sounded arrogant, but it didn't. It was just a fact, delivered with the weight of a man who knew his own place in the world. They fell silent again, and Imani leaned back against the plush leather seat. The exhaustion hit her hard now that she was finally warm. A 14-hour shift straight on the hospital floor, short-staffed, no lunch break, and a patient coding during her last hour. She had not meant to miss the last bus, but things like that kept happening. Her life was a balancing act on the edge of collapse. Rent overdue, her second job cutting shifts, and her student loan collector calling like clockwork. He turned the car into an underground garage. Imani's eyes widened as they descended into a private entrance lined with polished concrete and soft lighting. This was not just any apartment building. "You live here?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "For now," he replied, putting the car in park. "Come on." "You are staying here tonight," she blinked. "Wait, what?" "It is not a question," he said, already stepping out of the car. "You need a place to sleep." "I have more than enough space," her instincts flared. "I can't just stay at some stranger's place." He paused beside the open passenger door, meeting her eyes without force or plea. "No strings. I will take the guest room. Lock the door if you want, but you are not wandering out into that storm." She bit her lip, half of her brain telling her this was insane, the other half weighed down by fatigue and the memory of that frozen bench. After a moment, she got out of the car. Inside, the apartment was even more stunning than she expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking view of the snow-covered city. There was a roaring fireplace, warm lighting, and a silence so complete it felt sacred. The space was elegant, masculine, and screamed wealth, but it wasn't cold. You could feel the power of the man who lived here. "You can take the room on the left," he said, gesturing toward a hallway. "There are clean clothes in the dresser. They will be big on you, but warm." She turned to him slowly. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged slightly, a gesture that seemed foreign on his stern features. "Because I can, and because even a man like me has a conscience." That answer lingered with her as she walked to the guest room. The bed was made perfectly. The sheets smelled like sandalwood and something expensive. Everything was pristine, but it did not feel empty. It felt lived in, yet untouched, like someone who had everything and still felt nothing. 15 minutes later, wearing an oversized gray sweater and sweatpants that almost swallowed her, Imani stepped quietly back into the kitchen. She had meant to ask for water, but froze in the doorway. Jaewa was standing at the stove cooking. Not a private chef, not takeout, just him in a white t-shirt and dark slacks stirring something in a small pot. The powerful Korean mafia boss, a figure of fear in the city's underbelly, was making ramen. He glanced over and noticed her watching. "I figured you might be hungry," she blinked. "What are you making?" "Ramen," he said simply. "Nothing fancy, just warm." She stepped closer, surprised at how normal he looked now. Just a man, not a fearsome figure, just someone who, for whatever reason, had seen her and fed her. As she sat at the counter, he set a bowl in front of her and handed her a pair of chopsticks. She stared at him, more confused than ever. "You're not what I expected." He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Neither are you." The morning light spilled through the tall windows, casting soft gold across the guest room. Imani awoke to the scent of coffee drifting through the apartment and the strange comfort of sheets far softer than any she had ever owned. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all returned. The snow, the armored car, the mysterious Korean mafia boss who had made her ramen at 2 a.m. She found a note on the kitchen counter written in precise, strong handwriting. "There's cab money on the table. You can leave whenever you're ready, but if you want to talk again, call me." Beneath it, a crisp $100 bill and a business card. "Kwon Jae-hwa, KJH Holdings." She stared at the name for a long minute. It meant nothing to her, just a name on a card, but she knew it was a front for something much larger and more dangerous. She took the money but left the card. 3 days passed. She did not call. But on the 4th evening, while working a volunteer shift at a community health fair organized by the hospital, she saw him again. He was standing in the back of the event hall, silent and still among the bustling crowd of nurses, patients, and donors. No fanfare, no entourage of menacing figures, just him, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Imani was helping a frail, elderly man into a chair for his free checkup. He had no ID, no insurance, no family listed, just a worn-out coat and a gentle smile. She knelt beside him, speaking softly, taking his blood pressure with the tenderness of someone who believed every person deserved dignity, no matter their circumstances. From across the room, Jaewa watched. He did not move, did not interrupt, but something in his expression shifted, something subtle but profound. When the line thinned and the crowd began to disperse, Imani turned and noticed him. She hesitated, then approached him. "You followed me here?" she asked, half teasing, half unsure. "No," he said. "My organization funds this program every year." "I just did not expect to see you," she folded her arms. "Well, here I am," he looked around the hall. "You volunteer after 14-hour shifts?" She shrugged. "People need help." "I know what it's like not to have any," he nodded, quiet for a moment, then said, "My mother was a nurse." Lily tilted her head. "You never mentioned that. There's a lot I do not mention," he replied, the edge of a smile touching his lips. They stood in silence for a beat. Then he said, "Come with me, just for coffee." No pressure, she hesitated again, but this time she nodded. Coffee turned into a walk. The walk turned into sitting on a bench at the edge of Central Park, where the snow had melted just enough to expose the earth beneath. They did not talk about his business or her struggles. They talked about insomnia, about bad cafeteria coffee, about books they had started and never finished. It became a pattern. Over the next few weeks, they kept meeting. Sometimes they would meet at the hospital cafeteria late at night. Sometimes he would send a driver to take her to a quiet spot where he was already waiting with hot chocolate or a bag of her favorite chips he had somehow learned about. They never labeled what they were doing. They were two people from different worlds, figuring out how to exist in the same space. One night, as they sat side by side on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum, she looked over at him and said, "You're different from what I imagine a mafia boss would be like." He turned to her, his voice low. "And what do they say about you?" She smiled. "That I am too kind for my own good." He looked at her for a long moment. "It is not kindness. It is just humanity." "Maybe I am trying to remember mine." She did not respond. She just leaned back and looked up at the stars peeking through the New York haze. And for the first time in a long while, the night felt gentle. Kwon Jae-wha had always been a man who preferred silence. It was where he felt most in control, most himself. His father had been the previous head of the syndicate, a cold and ruthless man who had groomed his son for power from birth. Jae-wha learned early that emotion was a weakness and trust was a liability. He was 12 when his mother, a gentle nurse who had tried to leave the life, died in a car accident that was anything but. His father had not known what to do with a grieving child. So he sent Jae-wha to be trained by his most brutal lieutenants. He learned not to need anyone, not to expect warmth, not to hope for gentleness. By 25, he had taken over the entire operation, his ruthless precision earning him a reputation that made people fear him. But the power had never filled the silence in his life. It only padded the walls. In his private office, hidden behind walls of glass and polished walnut, there was a single photograph that he never moved. A faded picture of her in her nurse's uniform, smiling at the camera as if nothing could ever go wrong. Imani's green scrub's uniform had been different, but the exhaustion and compassion in her eyes were the same. It was the first thing that struck him about her. He never told Imani. Instead, he began to do what he did best, operate in silence. Through discreet channels, he tracked down her remaining student loans. The collection agency suddenly sent her a letter stating her debt was settled due to an anonymous benefactor. He noticed her hospital had been struggling to keep its low-income care program alive. A quiet, untraceable donation arrived, enough to keep it going for the next 3 years. He was careful. He never let her see the threads he was pulling behind the curtain. To Imani, he remained just Jae-wha, the strange, quiet, and powerful man who showed up with coffee. She had no idea how closely he followed her world, how often he rerouted his own dangerous meetings just to sit in his car across the street from her hospital, just to make sure she made it to the night shift safely. He told himself it was not about control. It was about making sure she had the freedom to keep doing what she loved. He had seen what burnout did to people like her. He had seen it in his mother's eyes near the end. He would not let Imani carry that same weight, at least not alone. Some nights after one of their quiet, unstructured meetings, he would come home and walk into his office, staring at the photo of his mother. He would think of the way Imani smiled at her patients, of how fiercely she protected people who had nothing. "You would have liked her," he once murmured aloud to the picture. "You were the same," but he never said those words to Imani. Not yet. He was still learning how to open the door to that part of himself, the part buried long ago when a small boy in a black suit stood beside a casket and stopped believing the world could be soft. Imani was changing that. With every unguarded laugh, every late-night story over takeout containers, she chipped away at the armor he had worn for decades. But she did not know what he was doing for her in the shadows. He did not do it for gratitude. He did it because something about her made the silence inside him feel less endless. And for a Korean mafia boss like Kwon Jae-hwa, that was everything. The hospital hallways smelled of antiseptic and overused coffee. Nurses moved briskly from room to room. In room 412, a figure lay motionless on the narrow hospital bed, her skin pale against the white sheets, her breathing slow. Imani had collapsed mid-shift right in the hallway between two patient rooms. She had not eaten in 12 hours, had worked a double shift, and was halfway through another when her knees buckled and her vision turned black. By the time someone caught her, she was already unconscious. There was no next of kin listed in her file, but someone still showed up. Jaewa's black car pulled into the hospital lot within 30 minutes of the call, his men having informed him the second they heard. When he entered the building, the staff looked up, not because they recognized him, but because of the force of presence that came with him. He reached her room, opened the door, and stopped. She looked small, too small. Her foreline hung silently beside the bed. He walked in slowly and sat beside her. For a long moment, he did nothing, just watched her. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. It was cold. He pressed it between both of his. He closed his eyes, a storm of emotions warring within him. When Imani stirred 2 hours later, it was to the feeling of warmth wrapped around her hand. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the first thing she saw was him, Jae-hwa, sitting there, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. "What?" she whispered. "You passed out," he said, his voice tight. "Severe dehydration and exhaustion," she blinked slowly. "Is that all you have to say?" His voice cracked, and when she turned to look at him fully, his eyes were storm-dark. She tried to sit up, wincing. "It's not a big deal. I just pushed myself a little too hard, a little," he snapped, standing abruptly. "You work 2 jobs. You skip meals. You barely sleep. You think that is nothing." She winced again, not from pain, but from the sharpness in his tone. "Jae-hwa, no," he said, pacing now, his hands clenched at his sides. "You should have told me. I could have helped. I didn't want your help," she said sharply, and the air between them stilled. He turned to her slowly. Imani's eyes welled with tears, her voice trembling. "I've always taken care of myself. No one ever shows up. No one stays. And I didn't want to owe you anything. I didn't want you to look at me like I was broken." He moved toward her slowly. She wiped her face, ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart like this." "You're not falling apart," he said gently. "You've been holding the world together with your bare hands." She met his gaze, raw and exposed. He sat beside her again and took her hand back into his. But now he held it tightly. "Not anymore," he said softly, the anger gone, replaced by something deeper, more possessive. "From now on, you're mine to take care of." She stared at him, stunned. He did not say it like a man claiming ownership, but like a powerful mafia boss making a promise, a vow he would enforce with all his might. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she did not pull her hand away. The move happened without a conversation. One evening, Jae-hwa had driven Imani to her apartment, and she had simply said, "I don't really live there anymore, do I?" He had nodded once, and from that moment, her things began quietly appearing in his space. Her green scrubs were folded next to his black suits in the closet. Her toothbrush leaned beside his. He cleared a drawer in the kitchen for her tea and left a fuzzy blanket draped on the couch because she always ran cold. Still, there were no whispered "I love yous," no arms pulling her close in sleep. At night, he took the sofa. She realized he was afraid of something he could not name. He was learning how to be close, but learning slowly. He showed affection in unspoken gestures. Each time Imani worked a night shift, a warm container of her favorite food would be waiting in the staff fridge with a note taped to it. Eat, please, her photo, a candid shot he had taken, sat framed on his desk. He never said, "I miss you," but he started canceling meetings just to walk her to work. She knew he cared, but there was still a wall, a quiet, hard wall she could not climb. He never said how he felt, never reached for her hand in public, never once asked her to stay the night in his bed. One evening, Imani returned from a shift to find the apartment quiet. She found him in his office, staring out the window. The photo of his mother was beside him, her own photo just inches away. She stepped inside, her voice gentle. "You always look at that photo when something's wrong," he didn't turn. "It helps me remember what?" His silence was long. "That people like her and like you still exist, Jae-wha," she whispered. "What are we doing?" He finally looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This," she gestured between them. "We live together. We talk. But we don't touch. We don't say things. I don't even know if you want me here. I want you here," he said too quickly. "Then why does it feel like I'm a guest in your dangerous life?" Her voice cracked. "Why won't you let me in?" He looked down, jaw tight. "Because once I let people in, they leave. I'm not people," she said. "I'm me, I know." His voice was low. "That's what makes it harder." She stared at him for a long time, then said softly, "I love you, Jae-wha." "I think I have for a while." He looked at her, eyes wide, but he said nothing. The silence stretched too long. And that was when she knew. She nodded slowly with a sad smile. "That's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to say it, but I can't keep waiting for a man who can't decide if he's allowed to feel." She turned and walked out of the office. That night, she packed her things. He did not stop her. He stood in the hallway, his whole body taut as if fighting something ancient and hard. But he said nothing. When the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the apartment changed. It was no longer soft. It was shattering. The silence she left behind was deafening. For days, Jae-wha moved through his penthouse like a ghost. Meetings passed without his focus. A multi-million-dollar deal was postponed. His second-in-command knocked gently on his office door one afternoon. "Boss, the council is waiting for your confirmation on the shipment." He stared at the photo of Imani. "Cancel it," he said. The man blinked. "Sir?" I said, "Cancel it." Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and left the building without another word. He needed to find her, and this time, he would use all the power of his organization. It was late when he arrived at her old hospital. At the front desk, he asked for her. The nurse glanced at the screen, then frowned. "Imani Bennett?" "She transferred 2 weeks ago." His heart dropped. "Transferred? Where?" The nurse shook her head. "She's no longer with this facility." She didn't leave a forwarding address. He stood there for a long moment, stunned. He had men who could find anyone, but she had vanished. She didn't want to be found by him. He stepped outside, the cold air biting at his skin. He walked out into the hospital courtyard and stopped at the center. His chest tightened. He turned his face to the sky, eyes filling before he could stop them. "She was the only thing," he whispered, voice cracking, "that made me human." Winter returned to New York with a hush of falling snow. It had been a year since Imani left. Now she was head nurse at a small hospital in upstate New York. Yet on quiet nights, she still thought of him. Then came the call. Her aunt had suffered a mild stroke and Imani returned to the city. She moved into a small rental, telling herself it was temporary. One snowy morning, she wandered familiar streets and stepped into a small flower shop. The bell chimed. There he was, his back to her, tall and still. He turned, their eyes met, and the world held its breath. Jae-wha looked older, wiser, but still entirely him. He stepped toward her. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low. The words echoed from a year ago, but now they carried a raw vulnerability. He paused, eyes steady. "If you still want to." I never stopped waiting, tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. He took her hand with care, and when their fingers locked, it was with the certainty of someone who would never risk loss again. He brought her home, not to the penthouse, but to a warm apartment filled with plants and light. Her blanket, her photo, her presence always kept close. You kept everything, she whispered. I kept you, he said. 6 months later, they married on a soft summer morning. Guests were few but dear. Colleagues, old patients, and friends. The elderly man Imani once cared for Rose to speak during the ceremony. She's always been an angel, he said through tears. Now she's found her guardian. Jawa spoke his vows without notes. I didn't know how to love before you, he said. But I promise every day I'll learn. With you, Imani touched his cheek, her voice soft. We'll learn together. That night, they sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch of their new home. Imani leaned into him, smiling. I never thought a freezing night at a bus stop would bring me home. Jawa kissed her hair, his voice a whisper against the wind. That night, he said, turning her face gently toward his. I didn't save you. You saved me.